Conservancy webinars. This will be recorded, so it will be uploaded to our Bird Conservancy of the Rockies YouTube page later this afternoon, and you'll also get another email with the link to that recording. And then we also have our other webinars, so if this is your first or your 5th or your 10th webinar, this, like I said, after it is recorded and uploaded, it will be on our Bird Conservancy of the Rockies YouTube channel, as well as our other webinars that we have done for the past year or so. If you have any questions, feel free to send those through the chat and we'll have someone either answer them or save them for the end for our Q&A. And yeah, otherwise we will go ahead and get started. So this may be your first time using Zoom or many times using Zoom. But as a quick reminder, down here at the bottom left hand of our corner is our mute and video buttons. Please make sure you are muted and your video is off for the duration of the webinar. And then if you're needing to send any chats, you'll click your button down here in the middle, the bottom center of the page on this chat button, and then you'll have a chat window pop up. And I unfortunately don't have a picture of it, but when your chat window pops up, make sure that you have your chat set to sending everyone, so that way everyone can see your question that you may have. And then if you have any issues throughout the webinar, feel free to send those through the chat and we'll have someone check them. If you have any technical issues or anything along those lines, we'll be able to get that worked out through the chat. So we would like to get started and hear from you. So we want to get to know you. So if you all could open your chat windows right now, we would love to know where you are joining us from, how many people are watching with you, and then what your favorite bird is today. Because I know my favorite changes every single day. Looks like we have Terrence from Louisiana. Thanks for joining us. Favorite bird is the great blue heron. That is a really great bird. I love seeing those fly around. Ooh, a northern mockingbird. I really like those as well. Those are neat birds. Nebraska, Colorado, Kansas. We have a lot of our Great Plains states representing today. Ooh, a scissored tail flycatcher. I have yet to see one of those, but I know they're around in Nebraska and I'm looking forward to seeing them one day. A snowy egret. Awesome. And for those, more Colorado. Awesome. For those joining us, just if you could type into the chat where you're joining us from, how many people are watching with you, and then your favorite bird for today. And so as a quick introduction, my name is Delaney Bruce. I am the Nebraska Wildlife Education Coordinator, and I'll be the one presenting our webinar on a bird's eye view this morning. And I'm actually based out of our Scottsbluff, Nebraska office in the Panhandle of Nebraska. Then we also have with us Colin Woolley, our banding coordinator, and he will be managing the chat. So if you have any questions about the webinar or for Zoom technology, feel free to send those through the chat and he'll get that all figured out for you. And then we also have Kelsey Major, our outreach and volunteer coordinator, who is managing our Facebook Live. And so if you have any questions and you're joining us from Facebook, feel free to comment those on the video and she'll get those answered or send them to us here on Zoom. And so why birds? Why not be Snake Conservancy of the Rockies or Mammal Conservancy? Why birds? So birds are inspirational. They've inspired humans for generations and ages, from everything from artwork to engineering. Birds have inspired people. We wouldn't have planes if we didn't have birds flying around. And also, birds are super accessible. So no matter where you are in the world, you can find birds, whether you're in the city, in the country, in a desert, in the tundra area. You can usually find at least one bird around. And they also provide ecosystem services such as pest control, so those insects flying around, especially on these nice summer nights. We would be infested with a lot more insects if we didn't have birds, and they're also important for seed dispersal, especially in prairies. So as the birds are eating the seeds and flying around from one place to another, they poop out the seeds and then new prairie plants grow elsewhere. And they're also environmental indicators. So birds are one of the first groups to be affected by environmental changes. And so as we're studying birds, we can understand how healthy an environment is based on the number of species, the abundance of birds in that area. And so they are amazing creatures, and we can definitely learn a lot from them in all aspects of life. And so a little bit about Bird Conservancy of the Rockies is we are a nonprofit whose mission is to conserve birds in their habitat. And we do that through an integrated approach of science, stewardship, and education. And so our science team, they're the ones out doing the research, collecting the data, analyzing that data, and so forth. And then our stewardship team are the boots on the ground. They take that data, they go meet with landowners, and work on conservation strategies on how we can coexist successfully with birds, especially with our many ranches in the area. And then we also have our education team, which I am a part of. And so we are the ones who are inspiring the next generation of scientists, educators, conservationists through programs like this and in the school and many other things. And so Bird Conservancy's work radiates across the Great Plains, all the way from Montana, North Dakota, down to northern Mexico, Arizona, New Mexico, and beyond. And so today in this webinar, we will be learning about very briefly learning about the structure of birds' eyes, because a bird's eye view, it's really important to know what's happening in the eye. And then we'll learn a little bit about how birds can actually see differently than people. And then how birds' vision helps them survive in their day-to-day lives. And so what can birds see? One fact that I think is super cool to know about birds and their eyes and everything before we get started on what exactly do they see is, so people have eyes, but the eyes in birds make up a larger percentage of weight of the head in birds than people. So if you think about our eyes only weigh about 1%, take up 1% of the weight of our head. Whereas with a bird eye, and this varies from species to species, especially for a common starling, their eye takes up 15% of the head weight of the bird. And so typically birds' eyes are relatively larger than people. So birds have relatively large eyes, and that serves many functions depending on the species of bird, whether it's an owl with their night vision or a pigeon with their monocular vision to be able to see all around them on the lookout for predators. And also with birds' eyes, they're fitted into their skulls. And so instead of like people, us moving our eyes back and forth, I don't know if you can see my eyes in this webinar, but we're able to move our eyes back and forth, whereas birds aren't really able to do that. Some species more than others, but their eyes are fitted into their skulls, and they usually have an eye ring around their eyes. And so especially with an owl, when they are want to look and change position to look at something off to their right, they'll have to move their head since they can't move their eyes back and forth like we can. So they have that very little eye movement. You'll notice they'll move their heads more than they'll move their eyes. And also eye placement is an important one for birds. So you can see we have two different eye placements on our owl picture and our pigeon picture here. So with owls and typically more predatory birds and animals, their eyes are placed in the front of their head. And so this is important for pinpointing a prey item and focusing just on that one specific item through binocular vision. Whereas our pigeon, their eyes are more on the side of their head because they are on the constant lookout for predators that may come and snatch up a pigeon. And so they're able to see more around their head, whereas an owl, and I have another picture that'll show the vision, the field of view, better than I'm explaining it in the next slide. But the owl's field of view is very narrow since their eyes are in the front of their head, whereas a pigeon's field of view is almost nearly 360 degrees around. There's just a small portion behind their head that they can't see with their eyes. And so the field of view in people, our field of view is around 180 degrees, so I can see my hands here on the side of my head without moving my eyes to the left or right. Like I said, with a pigeon, they have a very larger field of view. An owl is narrower. It's only about 110 degrees, so it's less than people. But owls have, and people have binocular vision. So this binocular vision is important in making judgments of distance. And so this is where the two eyes field of vision crosses over. And here's this picture. So here's the owl's binocular vision. And so this is important for predatory birds and insectivorous birds when judging how far an insect or a prey item is from them and pinpointing that object specifically. And so a pigeon's binocular vision would be very small, but their right and left binocular vision is very large compared to an owl and other birds. I just don't have a picture of the pigeon one. And so we'll get a little bit into eye structure. We won't cover everything that this diagram does because that would take up our entire time, and I want to get to the really fun, interesting stuff. So every bird, they all have retinas. We have retinas, all eyes do, and this is the inner light receptive. And it's covered in photoreceptive cells, which are called rods and cones. We have those in our eyes as well. And so in a human retina, we have 3 different kinds of cone cells, but in a bird retina, they have 4 kinds of cone cells. And those cone cells is what helps us distinguish between different colors of light. And so this is really important for animals and creatures and birds that are active during the day, so diurnal birds. And so these are receptors for color vision. So people have 3, and so that's red, green, and blue. And birds have 4, and one of them is specific to ultraviolet wavelengths, which I'll talk a little bit more in a couple more slides. And so with our cones, there can be as few as 1 to 2 cones per nerve cell. And so they work opposite as rods, and I'll get to rods in just a second. So they are I'll get to rods now. So rods are better for night vision. So they're sensitive to the smaller quantities of light. And so some birds have a lot more rods than other birds. Owls have a lot more rods than other birds since they are a typically nocturnal bird. They need to be able to see really well night during the night in the dark. And so there can be as many as 150 rods connected to one single nerve cell. And this, the more you have, the more it increases the sensitivity, but it reduces the definition. So that means things like look blurry the more rods you have. Whereas with cones, it works the opposite way of rods. So you can have as few as 1 to 2 cones per nerve cell, making them less sensitive but more accurate for detail, which is good for daylight. And then with birds, they have special oil droplets in their cones, which help them filter the light, which essentially is kind of like a filter for their eyes. So we can think of like camera filters when we're talking about these oil droplets in their cones. And it makes them more sensitive to smaller ranges of color. So people, as I look around my office right now, I can see many colors, and there's many different shades of the color green. So I can see light green, I can see an olive green, I can see a dark green. Well, with these oil droplets on birds, they're able to tell, they're more sensitive to those color shades, and so they can see more ranges, more shades of green than people can because of these filters, these oil filters. And so this has helped some species of birds. So there are seabirds that have red oil filters, which cut out the blue light that's scattered up from the sea. And this makes it easier for them to discern small objects floating on or near the surface of the water as they're flying over it. So they don't get that blue light glare coming up from the ocean as they're looking at it because of these red oil filters. And so, as I mentioned with the retinas, birds have 4 to 5 and they can see in ultraviolet. So here I have ultraviolet is on our wavelength scale. And you can see ultraviolet rays right here next to visible light. So as humans, we can see the visible light wavelengths. So from around 380 to 780 nanometers. Birds go into these ultraviolet rays. So they can see more than people. They see this visible light, but they also see ultraviolet rays. Excuse me. And so this was actually discovered by accident in the 70s with a researcher who was doing research on pigeons. And he discovered that pigeons can see in ultraviolet light as he was testing the ability of pigeons to discriminate between colors. At the time, it wasn't really deemed important because they only knew it was in pigeons. They didn't know all birds could see ultraviolet, but as the decades went on, it was revealed that many species actually can see in ultraviolet light, except for our night flying birds or nocturnal birds like owls and such. They don't see UV. And so more and more research has been coming out and being taken in the past decades about what does that mean since a bird can see in UV light. And so they're receiving light between 300 and 400 nanometers. So down here in this ultraviolet section. And I'm definitely more of a visual learner. So I have another graph showing exactly the scale of what the birds can see versus people. So here is our visible light scale. Again, with people, this is what we can see wavelength wise. We are definitely very high in our yellow. We're yellow colored sight mostly. And then here we have our bird vision. So we're both the same down here in the red. But as you go up near the purple, the violet, and the ultraviolet, the birds can see more. And so a lot of the photos and things I have here in our webinar today is artistic renditions, because we know that birds can see this, but we don't know what it looks like to us since we can't see in UV. So we can quantify it, but we can't visually color it since we don't know exactly what it looks like. So there's artistic renditions of what a bird sees in our webinar today, which I still think is pretty cool. So seeing Birds can also, they have that really good night vision. Birds can also see magnetic fields, which helps them during migration. But today we're going to focus specifically on this ultraviolet vision that they have. And so a world enhanced. So birds heavily rely on vision, no matter if they're diurnal, active during the day, or nocturnal, active during the night. They all mainly rely on vision with a few exceptions. And so I have a question for the chat. So what are some things that birds rely on their vision for? So feel free to send that through the chat. So like activities that birds need vision for in their daily lives, if that helps. Hunting, feeding, not getting eaten, yep. Feeding young, building nests, evading predators, yep. Exactly, so we are all on the right page. So birds rely on vision for choosing mates, finding food, scanning for predators, and rearing chicks. And then this one's specific to our webinar today, but also checking for brood parasitism. And so how do we know all this? How, like I mentioned, our researcher in the 70s figured out that pigeons can see in UV, but how do we know that they can see in UV? And so before, when we didn't know, when scientists were studying bird color, they did that, and this is bird feather color, what we can see with our naked eye. We would use paint chips to analyze bird color. So that's why we have a lot of male and female species like our black-capped chickadee, our western meadowlark, where to us, the male and the female look very similar, but that idea is actually changing since we know that birds can see in UV. So birds actually look a little different to each other than they do to humans, to us. And so as time has gone on and as we've had decreased costs and better technology invented, we are able to quantifiably see how birds look to other birds. And we do this by using a spectrophotometer. So it measures what we can't see. So it quantifies the wavelengths on the birds, and that tells us if there's any UV light being reflected off the bird. And so we have up here in our top photo, they're using a spectrophotometer probe along the bird feathers on some museum study skins. And that's how they're getting all their data and their quantifiable data and readings on their laptop saying like, yes, this spot is UV or this spot is on this point in our visible light wavelengths. And so this is an artistic rendition of what humans see versus what birds see when they look at another bird. And so you can see on our human side, the bird looks pretty drab to us, all black. There's a little bit of iridescent shine on some parts of the bird, whereas a bird may see something completely different, and they're able to tell a male from a female apart much easier than people can. And so this is how a bird would see with their UV vision. And then again, being a visual person, I like more graphs. So here we have our first graph again, and then just showing this is what a flower would look like to us, and that same flower to birds, what it would look like to them based on their vision and sight. And so a lot of studies have been done and are continuing to be done because there is much more we do not know about how birds use UV light for vision and for their everyday activities. There has been a study done on blue tits, which is a European relative of the chickadee. And so this is a species where the males and females look similar, just like our black-capped chickadees. They look extremely similar, and it's hard to tell them a male from a female apart. And so Swedish scientists actually did this and just did this study, and they also chose the blue tit because they don't have any visible flashy feathers between the male and the female either, even though I think the blue is kind of flashy, but that's just me. So the Swedish scientists used a spectrophotometer to scan the feathers of wild-caught blue tits, and they did find out that blue tits themselves have no problem telling males from females, because males have a patch on the crown of their head up here that strongly reflects UV light, whereas females don't have that patch. And so I think that's pretty neat, and I'd love to be able to just have bird eyes for one day just to see what they see in the world, and how birds that we think look similar would look completely different to birds. And so UV, there's still many studies being done, but they're saying that UV light also is affecting mate choice among songbirds, excuse me. And so in 2005, there was a study on museum study skins of 139 different songbird species, anything from cedar waxwings to barn swallows to mockingbirds to western meadowlarks, all species where to us with the naked eye, the males and the females look very similar. And so it was assumed that 70% of all songbird species are sexually monochromatic, and this is all songbird species in the world, not the 70% of our study. And so sexually monochromatic means that the males and females are looking identical. But after this study, 90% of the study skins were actually found to be sexually dichromatic, which means the male and the females look different from one another. And so they were able to find this through using that spectrophotometer and actually seeing the UV light being reflected off some of the feathers on our songbird study. And so it was assumed that, based on this study, it was assumed that birds specifically choose a mate based on the UV light reflectance, but that's not in it, the UV light reflectance alone, but that's not necessarily the case. The UV reflectance definitely plays a role in mate choice, but it's not, for most species, it's not the only indicator of mate choice. And so females prefer males, and that should say males, not makes, my apologies for that, that are overall brighter and that includes all other visual cues, with UV playing a role into that. So another study that has been done on bird parasitism. So we all know, I'm sure we all know the brown-headed cowbird. They are ones where the females lay eggs in the nests of others and rely other birds to raise their young. Some people don't really like that, but it is a part of the life cycle and just how they have found to be successful in raising young. And so there's been studies to see if UV light reflectance off of the eggs is playing a role in whether the parents can identify a parasitic egg versus their own egg. And so in some studies, there has been birds that recognize, like, this isn't my egg, it looks differently than the ones I laid, and then they reject that egg out of the nest. And then another study has been done where scientists mimicked an egg perfectly, like it looked exactly as the study species egg, to us at least with the naked eye, but the host bird was able to recognize that it wasn't one of its own because the UV reflectance off of that egg wasn't the same as the ones it laid itself, and so they rejected it. And so the evidence is suggestive that they use the UV light to understand and decide which eggs are theirs and not, but it's not super inconclusive because there was a Canadian study done of 11 species that were parasitized by cowbirds, and they didn't find any correlation, meaning that some species that were studied accepted the eggs as their own, whereas others that were a UV match, whereas others rejected them. So there's still a lot more studies to be done about this to learn more. As I said, this is a topic where we are constantly learning more, and the data changes a lot. And so it was a Czech Republic study where they mimicked song thrush's eggs perfectly, and yet they still understood the difference between their eggs and the mimic eggs. And then there's been studies done on how parents are rearing their chicks based on UV signals from the chicks. And so I have another question for the chat. How do you think parents decide in a nest which chick gets to eat first? So originally we were thinking hatchling size. I see in the chat the strongest chick eats first, i.e. the biggest, most aggressive. Definitely. We are thinking the same. The loudest and the most energetic begging chick gets to eat first. Who ate last time, or based on size? Yeah, so we're thinking the largest chick gets to eat first because it has the better chance of survival. Maybe it's the brightness of the gape, which is the edge around the mouth or the head. And then, so there was a study done in researchers in Europe about European rollers, which is a common bird. And this is a 2011 study, and they found that the chicks of European rollers actually have a bare patch of skin on their forehead that reflects UV light. And so in their study, they found that heavier chicks have the least UV reflective patches, whereas the lighter chicks have more reflective UV patches. And so to test to see which chick gets fed first based on this knowledge that we learned, they put a sunblock-like lotion on some of the chicks and then a control lotion on the others. And they found that the chicks with the block lotion gained less weight than their unblocked mates. And so when parents couldn't see that nutritional status with the UV signals on their head, they figured that that bird was fine. Like, it has had enough food, they don't need any more. Let's feed the one where they can see the UV reflectance patch on their forehead. And so I think that's pretty neat way to determine who gets to eat first. And so from chick rearing to adult life, UV has been shown to help with finding food as well, more so in songbird species, those eating seeds and fruits and insects. And there's been some new research that's come out about raptors not really using ultraviolet light to find prey, but there has been one study done about common kestrels in Europe of how they use UV signals to find food. And so common kestrels, they eat meadow voles, and they found meadow voles act like tiny dogs. And so as they're going through a trail in the grass, they're marking the trail, their grass trail, with urine. And that urine has a little bit of UV reflectance in it. And so as the common kestrel is flying around, they see this UV reflectance in the field, and they can follow that straight to a meadow vole. But there is more research coming out with this saying that the urine doesn't put off a lot of UV reflectance. So as I said again, this is an ongoing topic that we're learning more about as every single day. I'm sure different things from this webinar will change as we learn more. And so with insectivorous birds or seeds or fruits, they all reflect UV light. And so if you're a fruit-eating bird, that fruit is reflecting a bright UV light, whereas it's contrasting much more because with green leaves, they don't reflect much UV light at all. So that red berry to birds looks much brighter against the green leaves than it does to people, even though to us it already looks pretty bright, but it's greatly enhanced for birds. And so all of this knowledge that we've learned about birds using UV light is starting to impact our consumer products and how we interact with birds, which I think is pretty neat. So anything, we've been using that UV light knowledge to invent some consumer products that help hunters, that help birders, that help bird enthusiasts and conservationists. And so the first one is a better duck decoy. And so they're mass-produced duck decoys that are painted in a UV reflecting paint as an option to attract more ducks if you're a hunter. Most of the other ones are about being a better birder or bird conservationist enthusiast. And so they have created Birds Be Safe as a cat collar for outdoor cats. If people have outdoor cats, since billions of birds fall prey to outdoor cats every single year, Birds Be Safe is trying to reduce that number with UV reflectant collars. And I've actually gotten this for a couple of my friends' barn cats that refuse to bring them inside. And so they have a breakaway collar underneath this very bright collar up here. So the breakaway, and I actually have one with me now. If you can see in my tiny video, it has this strip on here that has UV reflectance on it. So the bird is able to see the collar. It has a bell, which birds don't really associate bells with a predator. So the bell is nice and theory. And then with this other collar, it again has these bright colors on here. And since a bird's vision is much more enhanced and they're able to notice more shades and variations in colors, this bright color also helps to notify a bird of like, there's something there that I don't want. I should stay away from it. It doesn't look natural. And then there are also some scientists, researchers are coming up with ways to help reduce the number of window collisions by making UV reflectant windows that reflect UV light. So that way you don't have to have those jail cell looking wires in your house, or I know we've put some bird decals on windows before at parks I've worked at, which don't really seem to deter the birds from flying into the windows, unfortunately. So I look forward to one day when there's a commercial window out there and available that reflects UV light and seeing what that does to decreasing the number of collisions with windows each year with birds. And then some camouflage clothing. So this is not the camouflage that we're thinking for hunting. This is camouflage, UV camouflage clothing for birders. So there are some sprayable fabric treatments that birders can spray on their regular everyday clothing to make it less showy to birds, so that fabric treatment will actually absorb UV wavelengths rather than reflect them. And so, because I remember in my ornithology class a few years ago, my professor was from Missouri and he would come teach up here in Nebraska, and he did not like teaching with Nebraska students because we would always wear red, because I went to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, so Cornhusker red all the time. I remember wearing a red stocking cap during that class, and birds see red. According to him, birds see red very well and are scared off by it easier than other colors. And so that's why he did not like working with Nebraska students, because we always wore red while we were out birding. So should have, next time I'll remember to get this fabric treatment, and hopefully that'll help. And then there's some goose be gone treatments, since geese are considered nuisance in some areas and to some people. These are harmless repellents for geese that are sprayed on the grass. And so the first spray is a harmless, bad tasting chemical that's derived from grapes. It's sprayed over an area, and then they combine that with a spray that reflects UV light. And so it's it reinforces that to the geese, it's like, oh, we were in that area tastes bad, and now it looks super bright. So it reinforces the idea of if an area looks super bright with the UV reflectance, it'll have bad grass and keep geese away if they're considered a nuisance in that area. And so that we are wrapping up to the end of the Bird's Eye View webinar. There is much more that could be covered and discussed as new research comes out, and we learn more about how birds are actually using their UV vision in their daily lives. I know it's a very exciting topic, and I could have dove deeper into night vision or how birds see magnetic fields for migration, but then this webinar would have gone on for more than our allotted time, and I don't want to take up any more of your time on this wonderful Thursday than I have to. But so gifts from individuals like you, along with businesses and foundations, help us fill critical funding gaps and provide matching revenue to several of our federal and state sources. So you can help keep Bird Conservancy scientists, biologists, and educators like me working to advance bird conservation from Montana down to northern Mexico. And so if you liked what you heard today or want to learn more and join our bird conservation, feel free to go to our birdconservancy.org/donate. And thank you all for your support and for joining us today. And here's another one of our artistic renditions of a human vision versus bird vision of what a bird may look like. So I just want to thank you all for joining the Bird's Eye View webinar. If you have any questions, feel free to share those in the chat, and I will do my best to answer them. I just want to clarify, I'm no expert on everything bird vision related, but I will do my best, and if I don't have an answer for you, I'll try to get back to you with an answer. Colin, do we have any questions in the chat?
Excuse me, I don't think so. No questions have popped up so far. Oh, we just got one. Just had a question from Terrence.
See that. So Terrence asked, what about birds in densely forested areas? Do they depend more on song than color for identifying mates? That is a great question, Terrence. I am not exactly sure. In my research for this webinar, I never saw anything along the lines of that, but I can definitely look into it more after this and then get back to you. I would assume maybe song would mean more than color for identifying, but I am not sure. Colin, if you have a better answer to that, feel free to go ahead.
No, I'm not sure either.
Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly about the species Terrence, with your second questions. So his second question, Terrence's second question was, the birds studied with UV, were they more not in forested areas? I know with the common kestrel, that was a more open field area that's been studied. And then with the brood parasitism, I don't think, I'm not sure about those. Since it's all nesting, it could be in densely forested areas, it could be in open areas or sporadic forested areas with the nesting. But I know the only one I really know for sure, Terrence, is with the common kestrel that was in an open field setting. And then the museum study skins were done with birds that were study skins, and they varied. They didn't list off the entirety of the species they studied, but we had things like cedar waxwings to western meadowlarks, and so we have variations in where the habitat they're found in, black-capped chickadees as well. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting on how parents decided that with that European roller, who get fed based on the UV patch on their head. So yeah, thank you all for joining. Like I said, this webinar was recorded, so it will get uploaded to YouTube later this afternoon. And then we will send out that specific link to you once it is all uploaded. So thank you all for joining. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, and feel free to check us out for our next webinar in August.